Hi. Um, I I wanted to give a second talk on hybrids of the gift economy and capitalism. Partly, and this is just to sort of go through another few examples. And this is, I mean, I suppose what I want to do through this is just to explain examples that are different from the ones that I talked about in the last video, just so you get more of an idea of what a hybrid of the gift economy and capitalism might be like, and realize how ubiquitous they are in many ways, and how many of these hybrids there are. So I'm going to start off with a belly dancing school that I was a participant with when I was living in Newcastle. And like I was one of a little group of drummers who used to drum, and Margaretta was the choreographer and owner of the belly dancing school. And we used to do choreographed performances with drumming pieces written out by Margaretta and so on. This was in Newcastle, which is a large industrial town on the east coast of Australia. There were at least 5 belly dancing schools in the city of Newcastle. And in Margaretta's school, there were the classes, the size, you know, this is at the height of the success of the school, which went for many years, like 20 years. I'm not sure if it's still going, but there were classes of about 12 people sorted into competence grades. You know, like, so there'd be an evening class on Tuesday and another evening class on Wednesday and so on Thursday, whatever. And each of the, you know, beginners, intermediate, advanced, and whatever. The people who were doing this were mostly adult women, so it was this kind of hobby class for them. And we do performances at theatres, fetes, the studio, and so on. The whole operation ran in its last iteration before I left Newcastle, was running out of a studio which used to be a squash court. So there was like 2 stories, and there was a lot of storage rooms and rooms in which to do sewing and stuff like that up the end, as well as a big dance floor with mirrors and all that. So let's look at the market aspects of the belly dancing school. So Margaretta had to run the school as a business. You know, like, you know, the dancing school's a business. Customers are consumers. They're paying customers, the people who are learning to dance. And it's in competition with other providers. There were, you know, other providers of dancing, not just belly dancing, obviously, but other sorts of dancing like jazz ballet or whatever. There was a really high rent for the studio. At that time, you know, for a while it was like $500 a week, which in the context of Newcastle was a large amount, and especially to actually make a profitable dancing school and pay for the studio as well. And it was a main source of income for Margaretta and her partner, although I'll come back to this in a way later on. They had other sources of income. Okay, so what are some of the non-market aspects of the school? Well, it's a cell phone business. So, you know, like in terms of the sort of Gibson-Graham theory of it all, it's not a capitalist firm. You know, she's not paying other people, you know, except on the most occasional basis, she might pay another dancer to help her with a class or something. But mostly it's not a capitalist firm in the sense of her paying employees and making a profit and siphoning off the surplus and all that kind of stuff. So it's a job that Margaretta chooses herself and expresses herself through her work. You know, like she's passionate about belly dancing, Middle Eastern dance, or whatever you might call it. She has complete control over her own work and the products of the work. You know, like the performances that she staged through the school, and you know, and the kind of. She was very meticulous about teaching the dance moves, and so people would get them exactly right, and this kind of thing. So she was actually producing the kind of student, you know, the learning that she wanted to do. So it's in all of these, it's different from alienated labor for a capitalist firm. It's not a capitalist firm, etc., etc. These are non-market aspects of it. What could also say that the another non-market aspect is that the dancers were also volunteers, you know, in the sense that they do things to make the school work. Partly by learning routines that would then be staged as a public performance, and these public performances, you know, promoted the school as well as being a gift to the community and so on. They were also giving emotional labor, you know, like visiting Margaretta in hospital when she was in hospital briefly, and it's like, you know, the sort of the emotional labor to each other and also to Margaretta in terms of, you know, like lots of discussions and people talking about their lives and what's going on in them and so on. So these are other non-market aspects of the enterprise. And the last one I think I'm mentioning here, donations of dancing to the public. Well, mostly when Margaretta's belly dancing school performed, it was like free. You know, like the council would invite Margaretta's school to perform at a fete, you know, a public fete, and you'd go along, or a school might be having a fete and would invite Margaretta's belly dancing school to perform. These are like free gifts to the public, and so this is an aspect of gift economy, you know, in the sense that the dancing's being performed for nothing, you know, as a labor of love by the dancers who are also volunteering this service to the community at large. All right, now, you know, like I did in the last video, now I'm going to talk about the tensions and limitations involved in trying to run a gift economy hybrid in the context of a capitalist market economy. All right, so okay, so that the first thing that springs to mind, and it was incredibly important, was that the rent on the studio ate up almost all of the income from the dancing fees. Right, so it's like the end result being that Margaretta's partner, let's call him Andrew for the sake of it. So Andrew was working a lot of extra hours of work, as well as helping around the studio for nothing, to make that Margaretta's dancing business work at the same time as he was providing the income which the couple needed, you know, to pay their mortgage and buy food and look after their car and all that sort of stuff. So although Margaretta always had ambitions to make the dancing school a massive commercial success, it proved really difficult to do that. And let's look at why that was as we go along here. So first of all, there's a competitive pricing compared to other studios. And another thing was a limited economic power of women in families. So most of the dancers were adult women who were in families, and so they had a bit of spare time. They could come out, you know, one night a week and do the dancing lessons, and then prepare, you know, do rehearsals for a performance and stuff like that. But they would probably, a lot of them were working as well, like, you know, a full-time job in the daytime, or at least part-time work. And often their work wasn't paying them as much as their husband's work was paying them, and consequently, you know, they had limited economic power in their family. So it's like Margaretta couldn't raise the fees to a point where it would actually make a reasonable income for her, even though she's working, you know, like 9 to 5, organizing the business, doing the choreographies, watching other dancers, attending dance festivals. You know, like there's a heap of work involved in it, which is not obvious, as well as, like, you know, 4 or 5 nights a week she's actually there giving lessons, which is quite exhausting. You know, like every Saturday afternoon, the drummers and Margaretta and the troupe, you know, like the leading dancers, the ones that she trained up who were really good, would rehearse for performance. And like, so, yeah. You could also say that the Margaretta's working herself really hard in order, and yet not hardly making an income. Like before she was doing this work, she was a primary school art teacher, and like in that role, she probably would have been like a deputy principal by the time, you know, the dance school was really going like a bomb. You know, like it's like. So she's made a sacrifice in order to have this kind of unalienated creative work situation, an income sacrifice. There was no retirement plan, you know, like there was no money being socked away for superannuation or anything like that. As I've said before, the effect of the economic situation of the school was that her partner Andrew was in casual work, and he had to combine employments, the voluntary employment within the school and a number of other kind of jobs. There was a little bit of tension between the sort of publicity needs of the school and the esteem issues for the dancers. I mean, I don't want to make too much of this, but like in a voluntary performance, say for a school fete or something like that, Margaretta would make sure that you know, only the best dancers got to do the more complicated choreographies. And then there were choreographies which involved everybody with, you know, like were fairly paint by numbers and not too difficult. And like this, allocating people like this into different groups and, you know, on the basis of successful performance and performance skills was a little bit, you know, like people found it a bit demeaning, you know, like if they didn't get the parts that they thought, you know, they maybe should have got. She'd keep losing dancers who ended up by being unable to afford to come. And like, because it's a market business, she can't go, well, actually, you know, this is a really good student I want to keep, so I'm going to continue to donate my services and let this student come for nothing. Margaretta couldn't actually do that. The dancers would sometimes resent the amount of unpaid labor that they were doing for the school. I mean, particularly, you know, long, you know, like if we got a gig, you know, like in a major theatre in Newcastle, there was a heap of extra work required, of the voluntary work required of the dancers. And often they'd go, well, no, like my family commitments actually prevent me from doing this. And then there'd be a bit of kickback from Margaretta. No, you know, you're responsible, you signed up for this performance and so on. So unlike maybe in a gift economy, this was not a cooperative, you know, like, and like in a sense, Margaretta, to protect her income and the payments on the studio, had to take control, because otherwise, you know, like the dancers and her had like, in a sense, different interests, inevitable clash of interests in this situation. And the end result is that the dancers are not experiencing it as having much democratic control over things. And I mean, a typical conflict would arise if a really good dancer in one of the classes would start instructing the other dancers. Oh, not like that, you know, do it like this, you know. Margaretta would take total offense at that, because from her point of view, that it's taking aesthetic control away from her, and maybe teaching this other person the wrong moves, and in any case interrupting the class and So like, these issues could not be resolved through any kind of democratic process, but they just led to resentment. And so Margaretta would end up by being perceived by some members of the dance classes as bossy and perfectionist, and some people left because of that. And like, it was always a problem for Margaretta having enough students to actually make ends meet. Okay, so I'm going to leave it at that and just say, okay, so this is a really interesting hybrid in the sense that you look at it from the outside and you go, oh yeah, that's a dance school, that's a business, that's a capitalist enterprise and so on. But actually it's really a hybrid of capitalism and the gift economy, and operates like that. Unless both sides, the capitalist side and the gift economy side, are being attended to and looked after, it can't possibly work. All right. Now I'm going to look at the Chikukwa project to move to the developing, you know, world, like ever, the global south. and talk about the Chikukwa project, which there's a film made in 2013 called the Chikukwa Project, available on Vimeo under another name. But anyway, a Zimbabwe permaculture project, I think it's called on Vimeo. It's a very successful Zimbabwe permaculture project. It was started in the early 90s. Now, these people are all members of the Chikukwa clan. So there's about 6 villages and there's about 7,000 people in all. And it extends over a 15-kilometer kind of stretch of hills and valleys and streams and, you know, a river and so on. In the 90s, right, by the 90s, they got into an impossible situation where they were mostly farming on hillsides, and these hillsides had been massively eroded by the fact that they'd cleared almost all the vegetation, all the trees, you know, like for wood fires or to get up more pasture for their cattle. And there was overgrazing by cattle because the cattle were communally owned and just grazed anywhere they liked. And the end result was a massive erosion. Every time, like in the rainy season, vast amounts of water, this is quite high rainfall area, vast amounts of water would come down in a particular season, in the rainy season, and wash huge quantities of topsoil down the slope, and they'd lose them through going out the river. But also they'd completely destroy gardens, and they'd come halfway up to the windows of the houses and stuff like that. So it was like, and the other thing that was happening was that they were running out of water, like that they depended on streams to provide water, but these streams were drying up in the dry season because there was no water retention in the soil, because there was nothing to hold water in the soil. And so, you know, then they have to a huge trek down to the river to get water, and then a huge trek back up again. Totally hopeless, really bad from the domestic labour point of view. All right, so the permaculture project that they set up as a community transformed the situation completely from the early 90s, right? And like I first went there in 2010, and then again in 2014. But it's like in this whole period, you know, certainly if we look at the 20 years to 1990 to 2010, during that period, the landscape was completely transformed. I mean, what they did, for example, was things like wood lots on the tops of the hills to absorb the rainfall coming in. They put in swales, you know, huge, you know, 2 meter wide swales or 3 meter wide swales with massive ditches behind them to trap water coming down the slope. They put check dams of mounds of rocks in the streams coming down the hills to spread water out into the surrounding countryside and slow the flow of water and so on. There was all that, but then in each individual house they created a polyculture orchard, you know, like with bananas and other kinds of fruit trees, and as well as that, then they'd have a vegetable patch, and as well as that, they were using their small livestock to produce manure and then turning that into compost and then using that on their cropping fields for maize. So all of this is a huge cycle of permaculture-based production, which was massively successful in relieving food insecurity. People were hungry, and creating a diverse diet, which is really nutritious. Okay. And the other thing you could say about the project is that it revived the community, you know, like community connections were really strengthened through working together on this project. Like they constructed, parties of volunteers constructed the swales using, you know, mattocks and picks and spades. I mean, it's like, it was good, it was amazing, and also fenced off the gullies of the creek so that the cattle wouldn't be able to get in and destroy the trees that they were planting, you know, to absorb water and stuff like that. And the way the whole project worked was as a cluster of clubs in each village. There'd be a club, you know, like a permaculture club or a women's discussion group, or people living with HIV/AIDS, or a preschool committee or something like that. So all of these sort of were called departments, and they were used they were, in a sense, departments of their total organization, their community organization called Seluk, And so Seluk is like the big NGO which they founded themselves. They built their own center for it. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about market and non-market aspects. Well, okay, so we could say that a market aspect is that farming land is owned individually. Like, okay, so there's a kind of half-true fiction that the chief, the hereditary chief, owns all of this land on behalf of the community in trust. But in reality, each individual family feels like they own it as a private property, like up to a point anyway. And I'll come back to that. Okay, the center that they created, like buildings to house people coming for training, a kitchen, all big halls for meetings and so on. That was a large center, and obviously there was some money coming into that, which I'll talk about in a minute. But it was owned by the NGO. Seluk, in a sense, owns that center, so it's like private property again. The whole organization of Seluk ended up by being run with the assistance of paid employees. I mean, the Seluk is much bigger than the small group of paid employees, in the sense that it involves all representatives from all the villages and in different departments and things like that. But it's like, at the core of this, there's like, between 10 and 15 paid employees, including kitchen staff and stuff like that, but also development workers, or what would you call them, agricultural advisors. There's a term for that, which escapes me in a minute. But anyway, extension workers, yeah, that's right. So these people are paid employees, so that's a market aspect, right? They also would sometimes, as a general rule, in fact, would pay villagers in certain situations for their assistance. Like if a villager hosted a farm visit, okay, so their farm's got really good banana patch or something, and they want to take people who are learning about how to do permaculture on their own land, they take them to visit this farm. Well, then they'll pay the farmer a small fee for that privilege. The people who did the catering for Select were also paid. The whole situation runs on various purchase commodities, like the four-wheel drive that Select used, the wire, like the chicken wire and the sort of fencing wire that the villagers used to maintain their permaculture gardens, is a bought and purchased thing coming out of the market economy. Select also supported some kind of enterprises by villagers, which were for the purposes of sale. I mean, that wasn't their main emphasis, as I'll explain in a minute. But, things like honey, beekeeping, honey, selling jars of honey, that kind of thing. All right, so now they're the market aspects. Let's look at the non-market aspects. Okay, so one of the most important is, of course, is that the whole enterprise depends upon donations coming from overseas. So it's coming from two places: a German Protestant organization, which is a sort of well-development organization organized by them called DEE, and then there's a British organization, the Tudor Trust, which is kind of does work in marginal communities and has a bit of a permaculture emphasis. These donations were really important to actually paying the paid employees of Select. So this is a non-market aspect, in the sense that this is a gift coming from middle-class people in the rich countries to kind of, to compensate in some ways for the exploitation of the global south by the rich countries, and to make an impact on how development, in quotes, is being organized in Zimbabwe. They're actually taking some sort of control over the means of production by donating this gift to this organization, which they think is doing the right thing and going about it the right way. All right. So The second thing that's really part of the gift economy is that mostly the project was concerned with subsistence production. And I'll give you a quote in that in a minute. And the project, you know, like, so, okay, so the thing they concentrated on most was household provision of food. And everything that they did was, you know, like, not everything they did, but everything they did to do with agriculture was related to that. So the woodlots were intended to put water into the ground, which would, this groundwater would later sort of fertilize the household farms of the villages, and so on and so on. The project also depended on voluntary labor, you know, like, it's a gift, you know, in other words, people are coming together as a community to donate their labor to this project because they think it's a worthwhile community project, which is going to benefit them individually as households, but also the whole community. So I mean, the most classic example of that was the voluntary work that did things like, one, construct the Seluk Centre, you know, build it, you know, they did it. Secondly, build these huge swales and like fence off the gullies and plant trees. What else? Oh yeah, each village was equipped with a huge water tank, you know, which was made out of some bricks fired locally and cement, you know, like mortared together, a big cylindrical tank with a corrugated asbestos roof. And it's like, and then there was polypipe connecting that to houses in the village. I mean, when we think of a village, we think of a cluster of houses together. It's not like that. It's more like houses spread out with little farmlets around them. So yeah, so that it was important to sort of articulate this you know, this water so they'd collect water by putting a dam in a stream up the top, near the top of the hill, and then it would go in a pipe into the big tank and then be distributed to taps in people's yards. All voluntary work. And there's even a volunteer appointed to go around and monitor the use of the water and how this is all working out. On their own farms, villagers are self-employed. You know, they're not in a capitalist business here. They're just growing food for their own family, a non-cash, non-market transaction. The community decision-making, you know, like ownership and control of the means of production. Well, okay, so the community is actually receiving funds internationally, and that, you know, that enables them to own and control various means of production, you know, like, for example, the you know, to create this sort of check dams in the creeks or fenced properties or whatever. Now, these decisions about how to do this are being made by meetings of Seluk, which is an organisation which includes both the paid staff and also representatives from the various committees. So that the paid staff don't say, oh, the villagers need this, they need that. No, we're going to make these decisions. No, it doesn't happen like that. What happens is that the committee of the village, the elected committee, like say the permaculture club in a particular village, will meet, and that may be 100 people. That's called an open day, and they elect representatives who go back to Seluk and say, well, we want you to do this, you know, can you help us with that, and so on. So this is a form of community control of the means of production. That's what it is. Generosity and kindness were key values of the project, you know, like, so, and again, part of the gift economy makes heaps of sense and so on. So, for example, HIV/AIDS, I mean, a really common thing in Zimbabwe and other parts of Africa was a sort of stigma if you got HIV/AIDS. And like the project was actively involved in creating self-help groups and kind of looking after people who were living with HIV/AIDS. So, you know, and they're explaining that they'd express the values of care and generosity and kindness to other people in the community. They'd also provided, the organisation also provided plots of land on which people would grow food, which would be donated to the more marginal members of the community, like orphans and people who'd lost their partner through HIV/AIDS or something like that. and also an interesting thing in terms of the gift economy is that okay, so myself and my sister were invited to a mediation, right? And this was about somebody who had cut too many trees on their woodlot, causing soil erosion, and the soil was coming down the slope and damaging other people's gardens and yards and stuff. And so they held a community meeting of all the involved people, and they did a presentation, like a dramatic reenactment of the different people involved in the dispute, you know, and then the men and the women separated off and discussed it, you know, like as a community, like what can we do about this, and came to various decisions about how to deal with this problem, which is an example of community control of the means of production. But also what we can also say about it is that, like, the Selok Centre initiated, you know, they were invited to run this mediation, obviously, by the local people. But when they came, they brought their car, their utility, their four-wheel drive utility, and the back of it was packed with, you know, like various useful things, and not to mention, you know, like juice, like orange juice and apple juice and stuff, and apples and various kinds of fruit that people don't normally get at that time of the year, and bread, you know, white bread and cordial and everything. Like, okay, so when there was like morning tea, the members of the Selok team, like the paid officials of the team, would go around helping, you know, distributing this stuff and talking to people and, you know, interacting and being part of it all. So like, this is a ritual of the gift, if you like, you know, Selok is coming and we're giving you something, as well as, you know, working on this community project together. All right, now it gets very grim. Now I'm going to talk about tensions and limitations. Okay, so I mean, none of what I'm about to say should be taken as any kind of critique of this organization or what it's doing. And like, this is in a sense, you know, a temporary glitch, if you like, in one part of their operation, which has been since resolved, you know, so it's not like it, but what it does is illustrate how market forces can interfere with the operation of the hybrid of the gift economy and capitalism. That's what I'm aiming to show. Okay, so this is to do with the cattle project. Oh no, I think I'm going to pause this for a minute. Pause. Okay, that should work. Okay, so what's happened with? Let's talk about the cattle project. Okay, so the cattle project. Originally, the way the community worked in terms of cattle was that individual people, individual households would own a small herd of cattle, and look, only a minority of people own cattle, but they're really important ecologically, because the cattle would graze on the tops of the hills, which was sort of bare and just pasture, and also individual households would appoint a young relative to go and mind the cattle during the day, and then bring them back to the household kraal, you know, like the enclosure, the cattle enclosure, at night. And these young people would be given bed and board, if you like, in the household of the cattle owner while they were doing this. And it was like a teenage thing, and then you maybe get another job or go back to your own family or get married or whatever. But it's like what this did was to emphasize the individual ownership of the cattle. Like, you know, each household has their own relative looking after their own cattle. And although it's on the community grazing land, which is owned by everybody, it's their own cattle. Now, probably partly because of increasing wealth or whatever, the community grazing land was massively overgrazed. I mean, the grass was really packed down hard. The soil was really packed down hard, and not much rainfall would get in, so the grass wouldn't grow very well. And these are typical problems of community grazing in all of this area of Africa. It's like dead set, you know, like you'd be surprised if you didn't find these problems. And what the larger organization, Suro, which was like for the whole of the Shimani-Mani district, decided to do and implement within each area that they're involved with, including the Chikukwa lands, the Chikukwa clan stuff, was a cattle project. Okay, so what the cattle project was designed to do with work like this. They would put white stones to mark off different areas of the paddocks so that say for 2 months, they'd be in this big paddock, and then the herders would move them to the next big paddock, and they'd go on rotating around and coming back to the first paddock at the end of the year. So it'll be a whole yearly process. Now, the aim of that, which is pioneered under the term holistic management, grazing management, is that the grasses get time to recover between one lot of predation by animals. And the idea is that the hard grazing by livestock at one time of the year actually makes the grass grow better, as long as you don't do it the whole time. You know, in other words, you're mimicking the natural behavior of herds on the African savanna by operating like this. And the grass gets deeper roots, the water infiltrates better, and et cetera. Okay, so that's part one of the plan. The second part of the plan is that rather than having individual households, you know, sort out their own grazing herders, that the Seluk committee, you know, or the Suro committee, which was tied in with Seluk, would appoint, you know, like say 4 people who would occupy the role of herders full time and be paid. And where was this money going to come from? Well, the money was going to come from contributions by each household owning cattle. They were going to contribute on a regular basis and pay the herders that Seluk had appointed. So people were going to lose their individual. They weren't going to lose their ownership of their own cattle, but they were going to lose their kind of control over the herders. That was going to go to Seluk. And then the other thing that they were going to do is, rather than having the cattle come into the village at night and in fact roam about, you know, somewhat unsupervised and cause damage to people's gardens, what they were going to do instead of that was to have a movable, what's called a movable kraal. It's, you know, it's like a set of posts in the ground with a sort of tent-like structure around them, big, you know, huge, and then you keep that there for maybe a month, and then you move it again, that kind of thing. And the herders were meant to stay overnight with the cattle, be paid to do that. So rather than the cattle coming back to the village, et cetera. Okay. So initially they got quite a lot of backing from this from the community, and like so this was all going reasonably well. Well, then what happened? It all started to go totally pear-shaped, and the reason was that this guy, whose name I'm calling him Paul Your Lady, so as not to identify him, was an old established community supporter of Seluk, you know, like from way back. And they got him to go to Alan Savory's property, with an inventor of holistic management, and learn about holistic management for a year. And he was to come back and have another year of employment teaching this to the herders that they were going to appoint. Well, he got the total pip. And he said, look, you know, like, you should appoint me for indefinitely, you know, like, I know all this stuff. I've been given this training. I should be appointed for the long term. And And they said, no, we haven't got money to do that. You know, our donors, international donors, haven't given us money to do this. And so we can't do that. We can't appoint you. The money's got to go to pay, you know, like pay for the kraal and all of this other stuff. And so this guy, Paul Ulady, sabotaged the project. He was quite a, like by local standards, he was a big cattle owner. I mean, you know, I'm talking about maybe 18 head of cattle, like very small herd by some standards, but locally important, right? And he was also a coffee grower and was making a bit of money from coffee. So he was, you know, a locally important guy. He sabotaged the project in a number of different ways. One was he told the herders that, you know, they should be paid more and they weren't being paid enough. And what they should be paid is this, you know, like that. Okay, so and he said to them, you know, sabotage the project. Don't you know, let them go at night, or you know, don't supervise them, or don't come up here, you know, and so on and so forth. Right. So this was effective. Right. That was the first one of the things he did. The second thing he did was to say to the farmer, to the cattle owners, now look, Selleck's saying you have to pay these herders, you know, like you've never paid money in the past for herding. Why, you know, why do this? Why pay now? And not only that, you know what? The management team at Selleck, they've eaten the money. You know, like in other words, they've got all this money from donors, which was meant to pay for the herders, and they're just using it themselves. They've just eaten it. It's taking it home to pay for their car or their kids' education or something. All right. So like they've eaten the money. That was the other thing. And then the other thing that he did was emphasize the sort of, you know, the herders that they're appointed are incompetent. You know, you can't trust them. Now, this sabotage was incredibly effective, and the end result was that like only really old people who were single, whose partners had died, and people like that would keep their cattle in it. And like, oh, I did. I know I had all these figures, but I've lost the PowerPoint slides. But anyway, something like out of a herd of 900 cattle in the Chikukwa villages, only 50 were being minded by the project. So it's like, the whole idea of rotational grazing is that all the cattle move together, and that enables you to rest the paddock and let the grass really get a go on. Well, of course, they can't do that if only like a fifth of the cattle are actually in the project. That's impossible. And so the project can't possibly show any ecological benefits or any benefits in terms of pasture and so on. And then what I also, I mean, I interviewed various people around the village who are cattle owners, and like they absolutely endorsed the idea that the project wasn't working. I mean, they'd say a number of things. One was, you know, like how the idea of rotational grazing is you graze down really hard in one paddock and then move the cattle on. Well, at the point where you've grazed down really hard, they'd say their cattle are not getting enough to eat. This led to another charge. So they basically say their cattle are not being fed properly. These herders don't know what they're doing. And so this led to another charge, which was like a number of cattle died. I mean, you know, like between 2 and 6, you know, like not a huge number, but, you know, significant, because each cow, you know, or bull is worth quite a lot of money locally. And like people use this money to put away in case there's an emergency and they need to sell their bull or cow and use the money for some other purpose. You know, someone has to go to hospital or whatever, a wedding, anything. All right. So what would happen was that instead of the herders putting the cattle in the community kraal at night, they'd go back, the cattle would be allowed to go back to their own kraal in the villages, and they'd be kind of wandering around loose. And what would they do then? They'd eat some rubbish that was left on the side of the road that included a large part of plasticky stuff, plastics of various kinds. And then the gut of the cow would jam up, you know, and they'd die, you know, like, okay, well, Selleck line was, this is because you cattle owners are not supervising your cattle properly in the village. And the cattle owners would be saying, this is because you are starving our cattle up there on this community grazing land, and they come back to the village and they're hungry and they'll eat anything. So all right. So you get the general picture, a complete schmozzle. And like the whole thing. Okay, so let's look at it in terms of the market economy and the gift economy. Okay, so the Seluk is trying to create a gift economy solution, you know, like to the cattle grazing problem, which in a sense it's a community solution, which maintains an aspect of the market in the sense that cattle owners still own their own cattle and can benefit financially from that ownership. But it's also a community solution in the sense it looks after the community grazing land more efficiently and effectively and treats it as a common resource. You know, that's the gift economy aspect, if you like, that the whole village. And also there's another aspect of this is that the village takes control of the means of production in the sense of protecting their own village gardens against the depredations of a minority of the population who are cattle owners. Right, so you can see that's the gift economy aspect. Now, okay, so now the private market economy aspect is that individual cattle owners are scared that their private resource, which they need in the terms of the market economy to sort of deal with emergencies, because they're very poor people, they've usually bought this cattle as a result of working in town for a while and saving a bank and coming back to the village and buying cattle. So, right. So it's a huge sacrifice in their lives that they've done this. And they're worried that these private resources are going to be squandered, you know, in the sense that Seluk, the management team, the community herders and so on, are not going to look after their cattle properly. Right, that's one kind of aspect of the private market economy. The second aspect is this, that people don't want to give some of their private money to a community purpose, and they feel that they haven't got any control over the community. You know, like they don't have sufficient control. They don't, you know, it's all very well giving bed and board to a relative. You've got control over that, and then that relative is the herder. But the minute you have to give it to a community enterprise, and it might, you know, so you don't want to do that. This is a really common problem in projects in Africa, I might say. Okay, so and the third thing, if you like, is that no, I've completely forgotten it. Oh yeah, I know. Paul Ulady, his angle on it was all like his desire, his sabotage of the project was all premised on his desire for secure employment. You know, and like, you know, like in other words, he wants a job in the market economy, and he looks at the Select management team, and they've all got paid jobs being funded by the NGO, and why not him? Like, yeah, and this competitive logic is absolutely, you know, makes sense in the context of the market economy. And not only that, he's able to persuade the cattle owners that Seluk management team has operated, you know, as greedy, individualistic market players and appropriated some of the money coming from international donors for their own purposes, which I think was a complete lie. I don't think it was true at all, but anyway. So these are all aspects of the market economy in its village manifestation, how it's operating in the village, and they're all the aspect. I mean, they are all the aspects which killed, you know, the cattle project as an expression of a more gift economy approach to dealing with these environmental and economic problems. All right, so I'm probably going to finish because this has gone for ages, and just say this. I was hoping to get to EDIP in Indonesia, but anyway. So hybrids are just one strategy for dealing with trying to overthrow capitalism. I mean, there's more purist prefiguring, which I'll talk about in my next video, which is like less use of money, less use of the market, less involvement in market processes, more attempt to set up a pure version of the gift economy. There are things like blockades, like forest blockades or mining blockades or whatever, or occupying Wall Street and things like that. And there's various kinds of reform strategies working through governments to try and create an approach which is better in terms of the environment or social justice. And then there's revolutions, like completely overthrowing capitalism through a mass uprising. So I'm not saying that, like hybrids of the gift economy and capitalism is the only way or even always the best way. But I think it's a really good way of understanding the sort of prefiguring strategies that are in play at the present time. What involves them, in a sense, auditing them and seeing how they're operating and why they work and why they don't work and so on. And so that they're successful up to a point. And you cannot predict the long-term outcome. I mean, an optimistic outcome has it that these hybrids, multiply and start reinforcing each other and gradually throwing off the sort of market aspects of their operation. And I wouldn't say that was impossible, but you can't tell really. Often these hybrid experiments make use of middle-class discretionary income, like in the case of the Chikukwa project, the income of the German and English British donors to the project and so on. And they're limited by various kinds of market pressures, and we've looked at quite a few now, and you can see how contextual that is, how it's related to a particular project or strategy or hybrid, if you like, and what's going on with that particular project. There's no easy answer to how does the market economy impact on them, because it's very contextual. And so I could say that as a conclusion that there are various barriers in the way of the gift economy, which are effects of market economy processes, and that we need to get rid of the market and money. That's been what I've been arguing all along. And the hybrids are a step in this direction, but long term, they're not sufficient. Okay,